Welcome to Inside AI, a podcast from the EPFL AI Center. I'm your host, Marcel Salathé, professor and co-director of the EPFL AI Center. Each episode brings you fascinating discussions with brilliant minds from EPFL and across the global AI community. From groundbreaking algorithms to ethical considerations, from technical innovations to real-world applications, we explore the technology that's transforming our world. Whether you're an AI researcher, industry professional, or simply curious about the technology that's shaping our future, join us as we venture inside AI. Today I'm speaking with Nicolas Dessaigne, a partner at Y Combinator, also known as simply YC, the legendary startup accelerator behind companies such as Airbnb, Dropbox, Reddit, Stripe, and many others. Nicolas brings a unique perspective as both a successful founder and investor. His company Algolia, itself a YC startup at some point, reached a valuation of over $2 billion at the last funding round in 2023. After transitioning from his role as CEO, Nicolas joined YC as a partner, where he now has a front row seat to AI's rapid evolution and its impact across the startup ecosystem. With his international outlook and deep expertise in scaling companies, Nicolas shared his insights on startups, the key to founder success, and why we might be on the cusp of the next consumer AI revolution. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So, Nicolas, thanks for joining.
Thank you for inviting me, Marcel.
So, I think we have a lot to talk about from my notes also. So, just for the context, also for the listeners, we are currently at AMLD, at the Applied Machine Learning Days at EPFL. And you came and gave a super interesting keynote speech. And then we also had the students joining you and EPFL founders who went through YC. And that was super interesting. But so maybe to get the ball rolling and for people to set the stage a little bit, can you tell us just briefly a bit about your background? So we met, right, when we were both at YC as you were doing this startup, which was very successful. You're today a YC partner. Can you tell us a bit about that path?
Sure, maybe let's start there with that startup. I started earlier because when I co-founded Algolia, that I was already 36 years old. So prior to that, I've done kind of some engineering studies up to a PhD in computer science, and I've worked in startups, in tech, especially in search. And then co-founded Algolia to build a search API, really. And that's what we did YC with in winter 14 when we met there. Algolia worked really well, but fast forward 2020, I decided to hire a successor. And then a few months later, I joined YC. So by then, Algolia was about 350 people, 65 million ARR. So decent success already. It only has grown more since then. And yes, joining YC in 2020, I was so lucky in a way because to me it was a way to leverage my experience and then help younger founders that were just starting, help them be more successful. And I ended up being at the front seat, really, of that AI revolution that started with ChatGPT. So that was a kind of a lucky moment, like such an opportunity for me to be to witness all of these changes.
Yeah. So how many founders do you interact with now on a, say, I don't know, monthly basis?
Too many, no, not too many. Many. No, each batch, each partner is going to be very close to 20, 25 companies. But then we work with all the others too. And so if you sum that up, it's hundreds of companies every year. But really close, it's more like maybe 60, 50 companies per year that we spend a lot of time with and stay in touch with after the batch.
Mm-hmm. And how, like, when you look at these founders and you interact with them and you think about yourself as a founder, what do you notice? Do you notice big differences, or you say, oh, that was just that was an argument I would have made right back in the
Yeah.
day when I was an early day founder.
Yeah, I think founders are only getting better year after year. Why? I don't know. I think there is more resource first. Like when we started Algolia, the ecosystem, we started in Paris first, so the ecosystem was not as strong as SF, but also the resources that were available online were kind of like very limited. Today, it's super easy to get access to way more. And also, I don't know, like the technology has evolved, and overall, generation after generation, people get smarter. So I think the new generation of founder is better, like than what we were back then.
That's a good sign, and I think we'll come back to that topic again, because this whole issue also of like intelligence obviously now becoming more of a commodity and what it does to our own intelligence. So it's good to see that people are actually getting stronger. So I want to pick on quite a few points that you mentioned during your talk. So you mentioned, for example, that over 80% of the applications that you saw in the YC Fall batch last year were AI startups. And I mean, maybe it's an obvious question, but why do you think there is such a high volume now of AI
Yeah,
focused applications? What's driving this fundamentally?
yeah. Actually, I think that it's maybe becoming a misnomer, like to call a startup an AI startup or an AI company, because AI is kind of like becoming so prevalent. Like everyone is using AI nowadays. It's like you were saying that the company was a cloud company in the early days of cloud. But today, if someone was telling you they're a cloud company, you would like, what? Like, what is not a cloud company? And so, it's difficult to actually see a company that doesn't leverage AI in a way or another today. If there is such a company, I mean, what's wrong in a way? Uh, so I guess that it's one of the last time where we would share a percentage of the batch doing AI because everyone is using AI. Maybe not pure AI company. Maybe they use AI as part of the way they develop software for something else. But overall, every company has become an AI company.
And maybe before we go into the details, I'm of course realizing we both did YC. You're very deeply involved now with YC, but of course a lot of people may not actually know what YC is in detail. So can you maybe also just explain like actually what happens during YC? I think there's a lot of confusion. I think most people know, okay, it's a startup accelerator, but then they often think then a lot of things happen, right, that you as YC do, but that's actually not at all what it is. So
Not
can you
really.
maybe describe that briefly, what happens during YC?
The thing that YC is not is a school. So there is not, courses that you come and follow. Like there is a few kind of crash courses, maybe like during our kickoff, for example, where we kind of like share a lot about like sales and other topics. But overall, it's a tiny, tiny slice of what happens at YC. What happens at YC is mostly each company working extremely instantly hard on their own startup. And we're here to coach them, we're here to make them accountable to themselves. And each founder is here to help the other founders too. And so the activities that are more like the programming, it's more around what we call office hours, the time we spend with the company individually. Also group office hours, the time we spend with with group of companies that have something in common. And these group office hours are awesome because that's where they learn from their peers. They kind of like make themselves accountable to their own target. It's the very healthy, positive peer pressure. And a lot of inspiring dinners as kind of another complement. Every week, people are going to attend a dinner where usually we'll invite some great founder who can tell them their story and answer questions. It's kind of like the bulk of the program.
Yeah, and we'll speak a bit more about this later. But just as we're talking about applications and YC, was important to remind people what YC actually is and how it works. So now coming back to these startups and the AI startups, which you said, okay, in the future we won't even mention that anymore because it's basically going to be a given. You shared that. I think a good 2/3 were text based. There was a lot of code generation, obviously, which is a very active area for AI. 22% voice and 10% videos, and you highlighted the voice. That seemed surprisingly high.
I think that was really the the trend, like the most impressive trend we've seen in 2024 is voice AI and how it started to take over the world. And I think there was a maybe the unlock here was that voice, especially in English, has become so good that we are past the the uncanny kind of moment where it's weird to speak with a computer. Now people got very comfortable speaking with an AI, especially in English, to a point where many people don't even realize they're speaking with an AI. And that's something that happened really last year, over the last 12 months. The first company I worked really that impressed me, that was pure voice, was a company called EPFL, who was doing an AI interviewer. So it's not like random like support call service. No, it's an actual interviewer who is going to interview candidates
For jobs.
For jobs. Like usually, it's just one of the interviews. Of course, people end up having a human-to-human interview, but it's a great way to filter applicants. And actually, it's really good. It's able to really interact, ask like a question to go deeper in any topic and so on. And that was the first time I met with them was end of 2023. And to me, it was a surprise that it was already so good. From that surprise, it became natural in just a couple of months, starting seeing other companies do similar things. Like support is a very common use case. When you call some support number, instead of waiting for 10 minutes, an hour, you get an answer right away, and with a very nice voice that has all the context about your account and answer your questions. And way better than some human agent may do in a remote call center. Other, what have you seen? Debt collection, which is actually a big market, unknown to me before, but banks need to collect on debt. And what were they doing? They would use call centers and call their debtor and try to get hold of them, and then try to get them to pay or give them some whatever facilities of payment over a certain amount of time or whatever. Well, quite a few startups went after that market and are extremely successful and growing super fast because they do a much better job than humans.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting topic also from so many angles. And we'll touch on some of those, right? Sort of the AI and humans in the job, or also like an interview where you lose a bit of the human touch, but then you can look at this also from a different angle, where when you said, debt collector, I immediately thought, wow, as a human, that must be such a horrible job, right? Running after people, reminding them of their debt. I mean, you probably get massive abuse all the time, and there's just this machine, basically, right, that does the job.
Yeah, it's probably a bad job to work on, but honestly, I've never done that myself, so I cannot really judge here. But an AI is not going to get mad at anyone. It has infinite passions. It get the full context of the person. It can listen. People need to be listened to. I don't know. At the end of the day, I mean, not judging that industry. I think at the end of the day, the experience for the person at the other end of the phone is much better anyway.
Yeah, and same even in an HR sort of conversation. I mean, I don't know exactly how this tool is used, but I imagine because it's at the end of the day a machine, you can now really have conversations with pretty much everyone who applies. And that also means you can actually get more out of people who are not necessarily good at putting stuff on paper, right?
That's a very good point in terms of discrimination or whatever. No, I mean, everyone has their chance, and the AI can unearth some tidbit of value in whatever applicant that would have been missed by a human reading a resume. So that's very good. Of course, there is the dark side of that, which is kind of more the fake calls, that the scammers, these people exist too. Of course, that's not the people we work with, so we're not too exposed with that. But the technology is there. It's not going to disappear. That means that anyone can use it. And so as as people, we need to be careful also when we are on the other end that, yes, that person calling us, maybe that's not our boss.
Yeah.
Maybe that's someone impersonating them.
Exactly. No, that's a good point. So another interesting statistic that you mentioned is that 90% are B2P, so business to business startups, and only, in quotes here, that's my interpretation, 10% consumer. So why is that? And in particular, you also mentioned towards the end that you think actually, well, we will see a revival in consumer startups. So you think it's just like a phasing, that first
Yeah.
it's the B2B cases and the consumer startups come later?
I mean, consumer is hard. Let's be clear. Even when the tech works, then you have the distribution challenge. That said, 10% in some, depending on how you look at that, I think it's actually good. That 10% of companies are actually already working on these projects. 15, 20 years ago, it was all about consumers. But today it's all about B2B. Like when you look at startups, most startups are working on B2B ideas. And we're starting to see more and more consumer ideas that become feasible, whereas they were not a few years ago. And AI is the reason, because it's leveling the playing field. Everyone starts from the same place. Of course, if you are a giant, you have like some advantage in terms of resource. But then the startup has a lot of other advantages in terms of pace of iterations. They can experiment with new things way faster. And because there is so many new things coming up, they have a new advantage here compared to incumbents.
Yeah, well, for sure. Let's talk about the geographics of this, because that was another interesting statistic that you mentioned, that of the startups that come to use, which means going to San Francisco, 75% stay in San Francisco. There's another 17% in New York City. So why is that? Like, one sometimes has the perception that, okay, maybe the companies go to San Francisco because that's where you are and that's what you demand. But then presumably founders come from all around the world and then they kind of want to go back. But that's not actually what you see. They want to stay.
Most of them. And the main reason is that they have a better chance of success in San Francisco than anywhere else in the world. And the 3 months they spend doing the YC batch, is kind of a period where they discover that, and kind of like it becomes a no-brainer. To be honest, the people who go back have usually very good reasons to go back. Like it could be family, maybe in some cases it's the market they are like targeting with their product. So it makes sense to be in your market. But for everyone else, if you are working on AI, San Francisco is the best place to build. The talent pool is incredible. The people you are going to meet every day, it's simple. Like, you know what people say, you are the average of everyone you surround yourself with. When you're in SF, you surround yourself with peers that are all working on AI startups. That's going to make you behave differently, go further. It's kind of like being in a sport analogy, like League One versus League Two. That's where everything happens. That's where you have access to the best thought leaders. They're all there. And that means you can, like serendipity, you can end up being invited at an event or invited at a dinner, and then you got some expert telling you some insight, giving you some insights that's going to change the trajectory of your company. All of these things only happen at San Francisco, and they happen pretty much every day.
So often when we talk about the dynamics of Europe versus the US, that may actually be the wrong sort of geographic level. We should rather talk about the different cities in some sense, right? Because
Yes.
then you're saying, well, you can't just be in, Detroit, right? And say, well, but I'm in the US. It's really San Francisco specifically.
Yes, I mean, there is one reason that makes San Francisco location difficult for European founders. It's the time zone. So it's silly, but that was a big challenge for us at Algolia because most of our product team engineers were based in Paris, and I was based in San Francisco. That 9-hour time zones probably became our biggest challenge. And so for that reason, sometimes, depending on like what you're working on, maybe East Coast can make sense. But honestly, that's the only reason I can see for which I would pick East Coast versus San Francisco. Like San Francisco is really where you have the best chance of success of reaching your full potential as a startup. Again, global AI like software, like not any startup, but like most startup we work with. That's where they have the most potential.
Yeah, no, I think that's super interesting because I think during the pandemic, a lot of people predicted, because now of the remote work and all of that would be completely distributed, but it seems to be going back to that.
I changed my mind on that. Yes, like I was the first to think, oh, if I were to do something again, I would do that remote now. But I think that kind of backfired after a couple of years. Like in the beginning, you see the benefits of being remote, like the productivity at home. Like you can indeed be way more productive, but you lose so much of the human interactions. That is what make, like, especially among startups, that's where creativity comes from. That's these different exchanges. You cannot replace that with a Zoom call. And like being there in person, meeting people, listening to them, it's like going watching a concert on your TV versus being live there in the stadium or wherever it takes place. I mean, it's not the same experience.
Not the same experience for sure, yeah.
And so like being back in person for us, even for YC as partner, our experience with founders is tremendously better. And for founders, a big part of YC is the peer community. Like a big part of YC is to put all of these super smart founders together in the same room. And like magic happens. That magic was not happening online, on Zoom. It happens because people are like in the same room and chat together and get to know each other, help each other, become way more intimate than they could ever be over a Zoom call.
Yeah, I mean, we see, of course, the exact same thing at a place like EPFL, right? I mean, you have all of these smart people. You need to bring them in the same room. I mean, there's something to be said that you occasionally can also check a lecture online, but the real magic happens, of course, interacting with your fellow smart students. Good. So there were a couple of points that you mentioned that were super interesting in the context of AI and how it changes things, not only from a purely technical perspective, but one thing that you, for example, mentioned is that since this now AI wave, since a couple of years, startups are spending less time in pivot hell. So can you, first of all, briefly explain what pivot hell is and why AI is now leading to startups spending less time there?
At least that's my guess here. No, pivot hell. So what happens is that when you're working on an idea as founders, maybe it's not going to work. And then what you do is pivot to a new idea. Pivot hell is when you spend a lot of time going from idea to idea to idea and never settling, like never stopping and fixing the idea you're working on. And it's hell because you kind of like don't make real progress. And it's very common. At YC, by the end of a batch, about a third of the company we funded would have pivoted. So it's actually significant. And that's also one of the reasons why we really think founders first, not idea first. Like we could sometimes fund a team of founders that we really like, despite the idea, even if we don't like their idea, because we trust that they'll find a better one if it came to that. So why? And so ideally, they pivot to a new idea. It works right away, and everything is good forever after. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. That's what we mean by pivot hell. People spend less time there, and my guess is that AI is making more ideas work. It's silly, but like there is a lot of crazy things that maybe didn't have a big enough market, or maybe they would just bring a smallish value, too small to matter to their potential customers. But AI opens so many doors, like so many workflow, like jobs can be made 10x better thanks to AI. That if you do that, it's so much easier to find customers for that idea. And you kind of like expand the potential market right away. And so I think the game has changed for startups, and there are way more doors open to them.
Yeah, because there's so many opportunities that were just not there. I mean, everybody always thought they would be nice if, but you just didn't have the tech, and now all of a sudden it's like here, all
So many
pretty
things
much
were not.
overnight almost.
Yeah, like every month, new models come up, and the things that were not possible last month may be possible this month. And so, at that kind of pace, the doors open very fast. And even if what you're working on may not be good enough just yet, maybe it will be in 3 months. And so that's a different world we are working in.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I mean, I'm still somewhat puzzled that it's not even unfolding faster, but that's because I'm always overestimating the speed at which people pick up things. But I do very well remember sort of post ChatGPT, and then everything became quickly available through APIs. I felt like, okay, that's it right now. Just everybody will just run towards that because there's so many companies that you can now build, but it's still taking quite a bit of time for people to get there. I mean, you obviously perhaps see that a little less because they come to you.
Yes.
But if you're just at some fixed place and you would think everybody is now running towards that direction, I'm a bit surprised to
come to San Francisco. You'll see more of these.
And I think it's now definitely starting to change as well. And as you saw yesterday in the super packed room with the students, I mean, they're all extremely interested. But it does take a moment for people to realize just what's happening. And I think that's exactly the point that you mentioned. In San Francisco, it probably takes less time because everybody's moving very fast.
You're exposed to that
you have that
daily.
visibility immediately.
Exactly. I mean, in San Francisco, you see it's not directly linked to this AI software, but you see cruise autonomous taxis on the streets every single day. Like you go on the street, you see these autonomous cars. And like for most people, when they come to SF, it's kind of like a magical moment. They take pictures, they try, it's awesome.
Yeah, way more.
For people that live there, they don't even think about it.
Yeah.
It's there, it's done, it's the past.
Yeah.
You see how, like, in a way, everyone there lives in the future.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. I do remember when we moved to the US, how we made fun later of Europeans when they see a squirrel. They're like, squirrel, because there are now so few squirrels in Europe, and of course it's kind of a plague almost in parts of the US. But I guess now it is like that with
the Waymos in SF are the new squirrel.
in SF. Okay, so another.
Well, I would not say it's a plague. By the way.
No. I wouldn't say. And I wouldn't say squirrels are a plague, but just so many,
yes.
right? And they come into your house. You also said that high quality data is an increasingly crucial and highly valuable asset. Can you say more about that and the use cases?
That's interesting learning we got from some startups sharing their insight with us. I was used to think that the most important IP for any company was their code, like their lines of code, because that's what they build. That's what cannot be replaced. Well, today, building codes has only become easier. Like everyone is using code gen tools like Cursor. They are so much more productive. They can use these tools also to refactor constantly. Basically, their pace of innovation has increased so much. But what's becoming a very important asset is actually the test data of these models. Because when you're working in a vertical industry and you want to make sure that everything the models say when you prompt it is accurate, and how do you make sure of that? You heavily test it. You build pretty extensive test data sets. And these data sets actually become way more crucial in terms of IP than anything else. That's what makes your product what it is. That's what makes it good. And that's what makes it valuable. Does that make sense? And like that's kind of surprising because for like historically, when you think about tests, it's always a second-class citizen.
Yeah, you have to kind of test it. Yeah,
you have to test it just to make sure there is no bug. Now it's the other. It's kind of like the return of like test-driven development. You have to build this test because that's how you ensure that these non-deterministic models actually provide value.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was having a conversation earlier where the argument was indeed that most of the economic value would be unlocked in AI applications, not the models themselves. But that's very tricky, because if you build, say, an AI application for a dentist, right, you can't just work 90% of the time.
It has to work 100%
It has to
of
work
them.
all of the time.
Yes.
And how do you make sure? And I guess that points to
That's
what
the
you're
way
saying.
you do it.
That's the way you do it.
When you want to replace humans, I think Casetext is a legal startup. They got acquired by Thomson Reuters, but they were one of the very first user of GPT-4, and they became super successful in a field like legal that's actually very demanding. And the founder was explaining recently on a podcast, one of the YC podcasts, how they did that. And it was all about testing. And so they were taking any tasks that a human was doing. They would decompose it like very atomic tasks, and each of these atomic tasks, they would test them. They would build tests for them. And by doing that, like for every single small task, many times, they were able to build an incredible, powerful software.
And then they would just fine-tune the model to make sure?
I'm not even sure they needed to fine-tune it. They basically
they just change the prompt?
Yes, improving the prompts constantly. I mean, the model had access to all the documents, so but maybe the context was enough. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know the specifics here.
But without the data, you're basically blind.
Yes,
you still don't
that's
see
another thing. Like fine-tuning, it's interesting. That can lead to a lot of progress. But the truth is that a lot, like with the very large context and the new very large models, actually it can do very well without the need of fine-tuning. So the baseline is already getting so much better that it's become much easier for these application startups to provide value faster.
Fascinating. Speaking of faster, so that's the other thing you mentioned is like, okay, startups are, even in that space, are constantly updating their stack, right? And they're getting faster and more efficient than ever.
That's a big difference between the startups and more established software players. If you are like a large company, like using a new model, like testing, approving, it's going to take months of meetings and reviews. Like the pace of iteration is so slow in a world that has new models being released every week. It's like including crazy innovations like reasoning. The startups, they don't have that constraint. They can iterate so much faster. A new model comes up, like a new state-of-the-art model, they can try it day one. And if it works, they can deploy it like maybe day two. Maybe it's going to take a week to refactor their code, but it's going to be extremely short. And that means they can innovate so much faster. And that speed is the essence of what makes them successful, because there is no way that these legacy players can compete. For them, it's kind of, in a way, maybe it's a bit of the innovator dilemma here that's happening. But first, they don't have the muscle to move fast. They need to take their time, decide, make sure that whatever they decide is the right thing. The startups doesn't have these constraints, never had, but the speed of progress in AI gives them an incredible advantage, where before it was just a smaller advantage.
But then how do you think about this at YC? Because you're now, I think, 20 years, right, at YC. So you have companies that, from certain points of views, you would consider legacy, right? Because they're actually now 20 years old.
I would consider my own company as kind of like
how do they stay? Like, what can an incumbent do? I mean, there must be a battle plan there.
They definitely need to reinvent themselves. They need to react, and some of them are going to die. Like, let's be clear, YC company or not, it's not a question of like, did they do YC 20 years ago? And the best ones will, and that's maybe kind of the segue towards like that essay from Paul Graham about founder mode that kind of like made a lot of noise and was misunderstood by many.
So what is it? Can you quickly just summarize that? What the point of the essay was?
I mean, the essay was written after a talk by Brian Chesky from Airbnb,
founder, CEO
of Airbnb, where he explained what happened to him before and after the pandemic, and how the pandemic transformed Airbnb. They nearly lost, they lost like 80% of their business in a matter of a week. That was like basically everyone was thinking they were dead. And he was able to rebuild the company. He had to step up. Nobody would be there to help him. And he went back in his founder mindset from the early days, in how he was building the company, versus the manager mindset that was kind of the established norm, which was let's delegate to experienced managers who know what they are doing. But the truth is that the manager, like 2 years later, they won't be here, whatever they decide. You are the founder. It's your company. You care. You're ready to decide right away. You don't care about politics. That's kind of like what changed there. And that was such a revelation. I was at that talk. I mean, I was kind of like identifying myself, like kind of like what I went through as a leader from what he was sharing. And yes, that was kind of a revelation. But that talk is for founders. Like some employees don't like that. That's true. I mean, the goal is not to micromanage everyone, but the goal is to not trust blindly people to do what is right. And the founders are the only one who can actually take that kind of decisions that can be seen as too risky by anyone else. Does that make sense? So if you are on a bigger size, like a scale-up or a big company, and you are at risk, and all of them are at risk of being disrupted by new startups that can leverage all of these new technologies, you have to embrace the new technology and be ready to take that crazy risk to disrupt yourself to actually be the relevant one 5 years from now versus the ones that's disrupted. And it's a very difficult thing to do, and most companies won't be able to do that.
Yeah, because you have too much to lose. There's so much downside once you're big.
Especially when you don't have that founder mindset. Like especially if you are a VP, like an exec, that is very well paid, but like not to take risk. Like that you care more about your own success than the company's success. And what if the company fails? Well, you find another job in another company. You don't have the right incentives to disrupt yourself. Like your incentive is to get a bigger team, not to actually reduce the size of your team and becoming more efficient. Because that's how like your political strength is measured.
But how would you, if you would all of a sudden find yourself, I mean, so for example, you are not the founder there at Algolia anymore.
Yeah, no, I'm not involved with Algolia anymore.
So how does Algolia make sure that they don't all of a sudden?
You'll have to ask them.
Okay. But it should in principle be possible, right?
Yes, it's possible. I mean, recently, who spoke about that? Brex, I think, spoke about what they've done. And over the course of a year, they transformed their company. And they have way less middle managers, for example. They move faster. They basically embraced that notion of founder mode. And I don't know in the case of Brex, but may have been triggered by that talk from Brian Chesky. So I think that was something that people don't realize, but that talk, I think, actually had a lot of impact on quite a few good companies.
Yeah. Fascinating. So let's go back to AI, and you referenced it a couple of times, what it will do also to work in general. You mentioned that vertical AI, and perhaps also here we have to define what it is, or probably again, I think if I understood you correctly, probably anyways a term that we will abandon soon.
Yeah.
It will be 10x bigger than software as a service because it replaces not only the software, but also labors, right?
Yes.
In terms of AI agents. So then, what happens to workforce dynamics and the role of humans? Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean,
tricky one.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I don't know. I think it's kind of like a incredible potential to unleash prosperity in so many ways because we can do so many things that were not possible before. But at the same time, at short term, like in the coming years, like some people are going to lose their job. And that's terrible for them. So exactly what's going to happen, I don't know. Like the dynamic here is too complex to predict. If we had more time, which we don't, like we cannot slow down the pace of innovation, I think it would be a smooth transition because it's going to happen faster than we expect. It's difficult to anticipate kind of the impact on the society. But yes, the on the software side, it's going to be a boom. Companies are going to buy more software and pay less labor, like have less employees. That's kind of what's going to be the consequence of that move. And that's great and bad at the same time, depending on the point of view you take.
But is an alternative scenario that those people will just find other things in the sense that there are just going to be many more companies because what a company does
For
is
some
now
of them, yes. For some of them, I'm sure it's going to unleash a lot of new companies, like just imagine what that power that's available to everyone will enable people to invent. But not everyone is a founder.
Yeah.
Not everyone is going to innovate with new ideas. The ones who have that in them and were never able before to actually create, because maybe they were not developers, maybe didn't have the resource or whatever. That will be a great thing for them. But the people who don't have that in them, they need to find a new occupation.
Yeah,
And
no,
it's not going to be kind of like, it's not everyone is out of a job next year. It's going to take time, but less than a generation. Like whereas like previous technology kind of big shift happened over a generation or so. And so the young generation basically grew up with it and the old generation retired. And so transition was easier. That's going to happen in a way shorter timeline, like just a matter of years, not decades. And that means that the impact will be more tremendous.
Yeah.
Like I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but
yeah, no, I think nobody knows.
but that's kind of like
yeah.
that's probably the one thing that's more that I worry about today.
Yeah.
It's more like the impact on the society. We need to get ready for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the other side, I'm always extremely positively surprised how quickly, in fact, societies are able to adjust if it's really, really serious. I mean, I'm sort of thinking back of the COVID pandemic, where, okay, for a couple of weeks, perhaps even months, it was a total shock. But then already the year after, it was like, yeah, pandemics, we're in a pandemic. And it's like, it was kind of business as usual. I mean, with all the drama about, measures and so on, but by and large, life just went on, right?
Let's hope for the best.
So I still hope
I don't want
that
to be gloomy here. I'm actually super excited about like all this innovation. And I think the like human race is very adaptable, and so we'll figure out a way.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean we should dismiss the risk.
No, we shouldn't. And I think people should just be very much aware that this is what's happening.
I mean, if the one thing I would recommend to everyone is just to use AI today, like in a personal way. Like play with ChatGPT, play with all the tools. There are so many tools that are available to everyone. Like there is no gatekeeper. Play with it. That's what's going to help you figure out your next step tomorrow.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to have these discussions, right? It's not just about, somebody wants to replace you. This is just a cycle of dynamics that's at place here.
It's more like, you should, whatever your job, you should embrace AI. I can think about, okay, how can AI help me do a better job faster? Like not resist it, embrace it. And and so satisfying to be more productive, like to go faster. It's such a great feeling too.
Exactly. So you mentioned also the reasoning models. So I guess most listeners will be aware with that dynamic. For those who are not, right, those reasoning models, it's a new type of model that's come out in the past few months. I guess the most famous one first was the O1 model, but then most people heard about it through the DeepSeek model, which was an open source reasoning model, which had all kinds of other different interesting properties. But this is sort of the next generation now. And these models don't just give you an answer immediately, but they actually reason through, in quotes, right, through possible answers, and through that come up with better final answers.
They are much smarter because they can can reason about their own answers and kind of iterate and make a better
realize
one.
that they're wrong.
But they are not real time. But they may take like a minute, 2 minutes more. Like it may take time for them to actually go through all of that process. But the result is like so incredible. Like it's already at the level of like depending of the task, depending of the domain, it's already at the level of a PhD student. It's actually pretty impressive. I think OpenAI was sharing that with their O3 model, they had already a test where they ranked like number 50 in the top developer in the world or something. I don't remember exactly what the ranking that was about, but basically already good enough to compete with most developers at producing code.
Yeah,
that's incredible. That means that it's going to empower so many people to build more and faster, and I can't imagine what we are going to build. However, it's not real time. I think that's the thing I was sharing also, is that surprisingly, given the power of these models, the adoption was not immediate. And I think it's mostly a question of use case, because most of the existing use cases expected models to be real time and get a question and answer right away. My guess is that these models are going to unlock new use cases where people are going to build around that capacity. It's not going to be real time, but like there is so many like workflows, processes that don't need to be real time.
You mentioned legal and accounting as examples.
For example, like just imagine the legal space today. If I'm not mistaken, it's like 400 billion a year of legal services in the US. Software is a tiny bit, like a few billion out of that. And the rest is all human people, lawyers, or clerks or whatever, working on documents. Working on documents is a pretty good strength of these large language models. They can read way faster, they can write way faster. And with these reasoning capacities, they can actually become as good, if not better, than lawyers. And so my guess is that a lot of these hundreds of billions of dollars could be optimized, if not replaced. Not everything, but in part, by these new reasoning agents.
Mm-hmm.
And so my guess is that 2025 is going to be the year of reasoning agents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good guess. I would subscribe to that. It's actually interesting also now what you mentioned in the context of some of these top reasoning models now coming up at top positioning of global coding competitions. And then one could, again, going back to sort of this labor dynamic, one could make the conclusion to say, well, that means we're just going to replace all coders with that model. But what's just going to happen is that all the coders will use that model, and the bar has now just risen dramatically.
Yes, I actually think that it's just the job of being a software engineer is going to evolve. It's not going to disappear, because what we don't think about here is that by doing that, we'll build way more software. Like, just imagine if we keep the same number of developers, but we give them that capability of like building so much faster, which already is the case, by the way. Like with tools like Cursor, they're already so much more productive. It's difficult to imagine how much prosperity can be unleashed by simply building more, creating more value.
Exactly, creating more values, more companies. So I think my prediction is still we'll actually continue to have more and more work. We may even be in a situation where we just have too few humans actually for all the work right now.
That would be awesome.
It's the other direction. Speaking of that type of future, you also mentioned that home robots are around the corner. So what types? Because I have this running bet with a friend where and he's usually quite right with most things. So I'm always surprised when he says robots, it's just like so far out. And, we have this bet that in 20 years, right, I always argue, of course, you have a robot sort of, cleaning your toilet and fixing your toilet. And he says, no, even in 20 years, that level will not be there. Because if you look at home robots, basically 20 years ago, we had iRobot, right, who would clean your house. Still today, the most sold robot is iRobot. It's just version 7, right? But that's still the state of the art. And so he absolutely doubts that in 20 years, we'll have a robot plumber. What side would you take in this
I
bet?
would take your side. Like I would be even more optimistic than you are. When I say around the corner for home robots, I think we already have the hardware, kind of the arms, all of these things are already good enough to really provide value. What's missing is the models. Like just like you see these LLM models understanding text. Well, they don't know anything about space, about moving, about movements, and so on. So they're not able to do that. But we can use the same, pretty much the same technologies to power robots. The problem is that we don't have enough training data. Like for LLMs, we have internet. That's an incredible resource that was available day one for these labs. For robots, there is pretty much nothing. And so the limiting factor to me today, my understanding, is that the limiting factor is the training data, but we're creating that today as we speak. Startups are working on that. Not only startups, I mean, you probably know about Tesla, Optimus. And so I would say like maybe 5 years, maybe less.
Okay.
And when it's going to come fast. I mean, slower than software.
Yeah.
As look at there is manufacturing, there is a lot to do here. But at least in terms of prototype, I think it's going to come in a matter of like a year or two, and like mass production will take longer.
Yeah, good. We'll see. I'd be excited to have a home robot that can do more than just clean.
I could be wrong. Like 10 years ago, I was expecting all our cars to be autonomous by this day.
Exactly.
But we're getting there.
Getting there. Yep. Another interesting statement was that intelligence will become a commodity. We already touched a little bit on that, right? But still, I think it has interesting implications because clearly it's true, right? We can debate what is intelligence and what level can we unlock with the models and so on. But in the grand scheme of things, right?
It's more a provocative statement here. What do you mean by intelligence?
Yeah, exactly. But so still, right? What does that mean for human intelligence? There are all these discussions which just all become stupid, which I think is the wrong way to think about it.
I think that's the exact opposite.
So I'd love to hear your view on this.
That's what people were saying when we invented the printing press. Like you don't have to memorize books anymore. We're all going to become stupid. Well, not many people were able to read books anyway. But on the contrary, it kind of unleashed incredible progress because people could exchange ideas. Fast forward to today, I imagine a world, and that world is like just here, like available today or very soon, where every single person can have access to extremely smart and like expert assistant available 24/7. My guess is that it's going to unleash again a lot of creativity. You won't be limited by your own mind. Like you have a question, you get the answer right away, and not just an answer like Google could give you, but a thoughtful answer with which you can actually go way deeper and like ask follow-up questions and get this possible virtual assistant to do things for you about that answer. I'm just thinking about our kids, how they're going to grow up. Our education is going to be transformed when it's going to be so personalized and always accessible, like just instantly from anywhere. I think the next generation is only going to be smarter, but not just a little bit, a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And these lot smarter people are going to invent so much more.
Yeah, and they look at us saying how primitive people were.
Well, don't we all say that about our past?
Exactly. No, we always do that. That's what I find so fascinating. We always look back to the past, right? And we say, wow, how could they live right in this primitive state? But then, the future arrives, new technology comes, and people are like, oh, no, this looks very dangerous, right? It's like, no, but this will exactly be that future that looks back to us. So shouldn't we embrace it?
Exactly. That's I think that's the difficulty for any generation is to accept like that things need to change. Yeah. And usually things change for the better.
I think so too. I mean, the metaphor I use there is always reminding people, right, that there's this Alexander the Great, right? Who had, I think, Aristotle, right, as a tutor, like the actual Aristotle, right? It's like, oh, that's your tutor. That's, that must be a very nice upbringing. Now we can all have Aristotle, right, as a teacher, and not only Aristotle, but Aristotle who knows just everything, right?
Yeah, everything there is to know today.
To know, yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
not everything, but
No,
like a
but
lot,
what
a
is
lot more
known,
than
yeah, exactly,
lot
and
more
can
than
help you
layman's.
reason to things that are not known yet. No,
And
I
do
think
and do
that's
that faster. Like if you are whatever, an expert in a specific field, like doing research, uh, it takes you years to explore what has been done by other teams and like reading papers and like constantly, like it's going to take you years to get to the state of the art of your field. Uh, Now with O3, with reasoning agents, you can do that in a matter of like what, weeks?
yeah.
And like get this agent to read for you and then give you the summary, and then you go deeper only in the things that matter to you, and you interact constantly, and everything there is something new that is relevant to you, it's going to pop up. I mean, yes, that's going to change your life.
Yeah. Good. Let's talk a little bit about the global perspective here. So you are French, I think that's fair to say.
I cannot hide my accent. I need to work on it.
Exactly. No, it's don't. I think it's always. I always find it great to hear where people are from. But I'm bringing it obviously up not because of the accent, but because of your trajectory, and you now have this extremely strong U.S. focus, or again we should say San Francisco. You, I guess, are meeting a lot of European founders as well, and not only, of course, from Europe, also elsewhere. So what are the things that you find people consistently be surprised, right? When they come from Europe, they come to YC, and then they sort of are faced with the reality of the US sort of fundraising system. What is it that people should know that they don't usually when they arrive?
I don't think
in your
fundraising
office?
is the most important aspect.
Fundraising is not okay.
Yes, it's easier to fundraise. I mean, it's easier. Let's be clear. Even if I do think that companies have a better chance of reaching their potential in SF, it's harder in SF. It's kind of like we're speaking of League 1, League 2. Well, League 1 is harder than League 2. The competition is harder, and you have to work harder. So it's not a peaceful choice to go and build in SF. But I think you are challenged more, and by being challenged more, if you have what it takes, you are going to be able to go faster, further than what you would do without with like staying home. And fundraising is more the fuel. It's not the objective. It's not the end goal for any startup. Like too often, we speak about startups through their fundraising rounds, but the truth is that fundraising rounds happen because the startup is successful, because they have achieved something, and the fundraising is helping them to go to the next step. The money itself is not the goal. It's kind of the fuel for the next step.
It's sort of a consequence of something that happens before, and
it's helping the next next steps. Let's be clear. I'm not saying that these companies could grow as fast without having investors, but I don't think investors come because you are building a good company. You are not building a good company because you have investors.
Mm-hmm. But if you think about now, sort of going back to this discussion about San Francisco, like versus something happening here, how would you rank the different factors, right? So we have, I think you could say, okay, you need talent, right? You need capital, you need access to markets, so you need companies buying from you.
I think there is the people is what matter. There is talent, but when people think talent, they think employees. I think peers, like founders. When you go to San Francisco, your peers, your circle of friends are going to be all founders, pretty much. Maybe not all, but like majority founders. And there is no other place in the world where that can happen. And that ecosystem help each other. Like there is a give forward mentality, and so it's relatively easy to get hold of people and get their feedback about what you're building, to get their thoughts, learn from them what they did well, what they did wrong, And you can do that pretty much every day. And so you get better so much faster. Does that make sense? And so that kind of peer community, I think, is the main
It's the main thing.
the advantage of being there. And of course, everything else goes with that. I mean, there is so many founders who have been successful and then become angels, and that is how an ecosystem is really started. Is when you have some companies that exit, like some founders who make money and then give back to their community. And this is like, there is such a concentration of that in SF.
And because they know how to make money in that area, they're also better investors, not only from a money perspective, but
I think most I don't know, most founders who start becoming angels, they are not the smartest investors.
smartest?
They're
Okay.
like they invest well, they end up smart, but not for the same reasons than like funds. Because they end up smart because they invest in friends. They invest in people they want to help. They don't think necessarily about returns on their investment when they invest.
But isn't there a phenomenon where, I mean, you nevertheless, right there, we live in an ecosystem that is very, very tech focused, and a lot of people made a lot of money with technology, so they understand much better. They also understand the risks much better and willing to more take a bet than if they had made their money in some completely other area.
100%. I remember a long time ago when I was still in Paris, not like before founding Algolia, I was kind of like, I wanted to learn like about the ecosystem. I wanted to be the company. And so at some point I kind of joined a club of business angels. Like, I don't even remember what was the name, but anyway, and most people there were just retirees who had made some money by being an exec at a company or a leader of some kind, and they had too much time on their hand, and they were investing in startups. Well, I didn't do any investment with them. I was like scared. Like when I saw companies like pitching them, that was terrible. Like as a founder, I mean, when I meet founders who are actually chatting with such groups, like run away. The people you want is actually ex-founders, is actually people who were in your seat. These are the right angels, not people who have never worked at a startup before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really different class. They are both called angels, but to me, like when I speak about business angels, I only think about founders. It's ex-founders or maybe active founders, but it's people who have been a founder in a startup before.
But then would you say, so if there's a place now that says, look, I want to have, a similar dynamic like San Francisco from an economic, perspective, which, of course it's hard, right? Could even be impossible at the moment, but still, if you sort of would put together a battle plan, then do I understand correctly that you would then say, well, the first thing you should actually prioritize is to have more founders?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's not often how people think about this, right? They think about regulation, about capital, about talent, but very rarely.
Yeah, regulation is the opposite. Like you want as little regulation as possible so that founders have like more free reign at trying things without constraint. Capital is necessary, but in a way it comes with founders. Like if you have a lot of people creating a lot of things, like capital will be attracted to that space, that place. And it's more like encouraging people to try things. And it's also cultural. Like if everyone looks at you and thinks you are crazy and doesn't encourage you. I mean, Algolia, we are doing search. So even if we are not a competitor of Google, people were always thinking about Google. And everyone, when we were in Paris, they were looking at us like in the early days, like, what? Like search? Like, are you crazy? Like never going to work? And when we were in SF, awesome, like go for it. We felt the support. The mindset is so different. That's also another thing that needs to change for an ecosystem to be successful. You want like becoming the founder of a company. I don't want to say it's for everyone. It's not for everyone. It's actually a super hard job, like a very hard thing to do with your life. But you want to celebrate it. You want to encourage people. You don't want to ostracize them and like kind of like being always negative about their chances of success or like whatever. Some positivity here would help.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's still such a key aspect, because so many people say, well, Europe often has this sort of mindset problem when it comes to these things. And minds are just generally very hard to change, right? And it takes a long time. So actually, this idea that you can maybe do something locally, organically, where locally you start to create more and more founders, so to speak, that all encourage each other and the system encourages each other, that is actually a concrete path there, right? You don't have to say first the entire
Yes.
system has to change their minds.
No.
Because that's
It
not
goes
going to
step by
happen.
step, and well, I don't know all the ecosystems. I know a little bit more about Paris, of course. When we created Algolia in Paris, the ecosystem was so limited. That was 2012, end of 2012, when we founded Algolia. Even the founders, like there was not that many inspiring people. Like peers were difficult to find. And fast forward today, like how many great companies have been created since then? I think in 2012 it was what BlaBlaCar was there. That's it. I mean, now you get so many more like Doctolib, Payfit, Alan, to name just a few. Dataiku, like so many great companies in Paris that are like all insane success unicorns.
Yeah, the next gen like Mistral and so on.
And then Mistral now, like the ecosystem is not, you cannot recognize the same ecosystem today as it was before.
And that's a great story, because that's a bit more than 10 years, so reasonably
It's about,
fast.
yeah, 10 years. I think things changed a lot in 10 years. Yeah. And in the right direction. Now, is that comparable to SF? No, but still, that's we should celebrate that anyway.
Exactly.
Like you're never going to catch up with SF. That's not the goalpost is not the right one. But can you improve and make it a better place to create a startup? Yes, you can.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe going out even a little further, China, and obviously that's something that you probably feel now quite a bit. It seems like, okay, the US China relationship, if it wasn't already at freezing temperature, seems to be going to below freezing temperature. And normally we wouldn't necessarily talk about this on an AI podcast, but we now find ourselves in the situation where, for example, certain countries, including Switzerland, have been informed that they wouldn't easily get access to AI chips. And it's not clear, but the rumors are it has to do with relations with China and so on. So all of that,
because Switzerland has relations with China.
These are rumors, right? The point is, nobody knows why a few European countries, which Switzerland is part of, did land in a sort of tier 2 and not the tier that has unlimited access, right? And rumors are that it's potentially because everything in this world, right, is sort of pushing towards that conflict between the US and China. I'm sure there's tons of discussions now on the diplomatic backdoor level.
I'm not privy to that.
Me neither. And I'm not asking you about that, but nevertheless, you must somehow also feel that at YC, or is it just something that does not touch you at all?
I mean, it touches us when DeepSeek is released, because that's kind of like a really big change in the ecosystem of like AI labs, and like it actually had a huge impact on AI labs,
but not because it's Chinese, but because it's open source.
Because it's open source, and because of the cost of training, like they actually innovated a lot, and a lot of things that's going to, all of these innovations are going to be used by all the other labs now. So there is a huge impact. Now, for startups, honestly, they have better things to think about than politics, and so they're not that impacted directly. At least their day-to-day doesn't change. Some of them may, I don't know, have the government as a customer, or maybe they may be closer to the action. But for most of them, they continue their life and they just build the better software, try to find customers. Well, they don't sell to Chinese companies, but they are already in SF in the US. So most of their customers are going to be American, maybe European, and so that doesn't change.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'd be curious to speak to you in 2 or 3 years and see how that has developed.
I mean, like everything, the geopolitical whatever happens between these two countries will have a huge impact on the world.
Exactly.
But startups are part of the world. But today, on a day-to-day, it doesn't change much how startups are going to behave.
Yeah. So going back a bit to AI again, well, we were talking about AI, but more directly and with startups. So what are other factors that you see? I mean, okay, we mentioned, right, B2B, new use cases, voice and so on. But you also mentioned that actually now the companies are able to scale so much faster. Can you
Yes.
speak a little bit to that? And
Yeah, I was thinking about that. When I was a founder, the best startups, like really the outliers, they were growing from 0 to 1 million ARR in 12 months. It's kind of like was the golden
so can you define ARR for those who are not
yes.
familiar with the term?
Annual recurring revenue. So that's mostly for SaaS startup selling B2B, like licenses, subscriptions. And so
that means you sell that much licenses that every year you are guaranteed in quotes to make $1 million in revenue.
Exactly. Like at a given point of time, you look at how much revenue you are making on a yearly basis, and that's 1 million. That's the million I'm speaking about in terms of ARR. And that's incredible. Like going from 0 to 1 in 12 months, it's really best in class. This best in class category now is 1 to 10 million. People are able to grow much faster
within a year.
Within a year, it's incredible. I mean, and some companies do even better. I think Cursor did 0. I don't remember, but I think it was 1 to 100 in a year.
I saw a statistic like that. Yeah, it was
0 to 100 in like 18 months or something, like something crazy.
Crazy, yeah.
Like that's the outlier of the outliers. Even YC, I remember the mantra back when we did YC in 2014. Our goal was to grow 10% week over week, and that was really aspirational goal. Like maybe one company in the batch would achieve that. It was kind of like actually insane. The summer batch and fall batch of last year, they on average achieved 10% week over week growth.
On average.
So like the median startup was achieving this 10% week over week, where it was like maybe 1 a batch, 2 a batch 10 years ago. And that kind of like, yes, the pace at which these startups are able to grow is incredible.
And why is that? Is it, I mean, obviously, one can argue, well, everything just goes faster, but is it fundamentally because the innovations that they can now create just really unlock much more tangible values that the customers are immediately willing to pay for it?
That's exactly it. They can build, they can provide more value faster. And so if they can build a software in a few months that's 10x better than what they want to replace, like, of course they're going to close deals. Like, and even from people who would, be very slow to convince, like in past years, when you can prove them, you can 10x whatever, like reduce the cost by 10 or increase the value by 10 or like 10x from whatever they do, of course they are going to take you seriously. And that's what enables these startups to grow much faster. And that's enabled because of AI, because the progress of AI is so fast. And that's also possible because the incumbents are not able to go as fast. And so they cannot actually deploy that kind of 10x as fast as startups can.
And one of the interesting pricing phenomena is just the decay of the pricing of AI itself. So the price per call or per token rather.
Yes.
Is that something that you also see in real time, where like with every batch, all of a sudden ideas become economically feasible?
Yes, I think it's about 10x per year, kind of the reduction in cost. So something that costs you $1 today will cost you 10 cents in 1 year. And if you can continue anticipating that for a couple of years, I mean, things that are like prohibitive today, like may be 100x less expensive in 2 years, and become like extremely cheap and affordable for everyone. And that's incredible because the comparable would be the Moore's law, but Moore's law was 2x every 18 months. Like we are 10x every 12 months. Like it's super exponential. It's incredible, like how AI becomes so affordable. It comes from hardware, but also from optimization of the model. Like and I don't think we ever reached the limit here. So it's not going to plateau anytime soon. And if you think this way, you can project yourself. Hey, what if in 12 months everything is 10x cheaper? Or I can do the same for 10x cheaper, or for the same price, I can do 10x more. In that world, what does my product become? What does my company become? That means you can also work on things today that seem impossible, that seem completely insane, because it's not, the cost doesn't make sense. It's because there is no way it can become profitable. But then if you project yourself 12 months, you realize, oh, wow, in just 12 months, I've got a killing business. Like I got a great business.
And you've already built it, so you don't have to then wait first and build it.
And that means you can start working now on things that may not make sense today, but that will totally make sense 12 months from now. And I think that's, that's always been true before, like when you were building software in the past, and it was a little sluggish. Oh, should I spend a lot of time to optimize it? Well, no, the CPU are going to catch up, and like in a year or two, it will be good enough. Well, just replace a year or two by a month or two. I mean, it's it becomes really a thing that like we're not prepared yet as people to think this way.
Yeah, crazy fast.
Crazy fast, and I guess founders have an advantage here because they are like more prepared. Even for founders, it's difficult to think like that. They are definitely more prepared than the incumbents.
So to wrap it up, maybe one or two questions also still about YC. So you mentioned, I think also today and in your talk, that you are really mostly looking for people, right? And famously you said also just before there were many cases where you funded founders despite their idea.
I mean, let me take Casey. Like, yeah, I mean, we like them to have an idea.
Yeah, exactly.
But we think the founders are more important.
But then, so what is it actually that you then look for in founders? Because you cannot just look at the idea, because you said there, that's just not the relevant part necessarily. So what is it that you look for? And famously, if it's still the same, you make decisions on founders very fast, right? You meet with them for just a very short time, and then you make a decision.
Yes. What we've discovered is that, historically, I think the first interviews of YC back in 2005, I think that was half an hour.
Half an hour.
Half an hour. But usually after 5 minutes, you know if you want to fund the company or not. And the last 25 are kind of like terrible because you cannot really cut short the interview, It's rude. but then so you have to fake something.
Yeah.
So and after experimenting a little, 10 minutes ended up being the right kind of lens, because it's enough to get a sense like if you want to fund or not. And then, you know what? If you have more questions, you can always do a follow-up interview. But most of the time it's enough, and it's short enough that you don't waste the time of anyone.
10 minutes.
That's how it became 10 minutes. Founders, I don't know how to summarize that because there is no one attribute that is the only one that matters. It also depends on the background of the founders. We're going to look at what they've done before, who they are in life, like their expertise. At the end, we want them to be able to build what they are working on. I think that's a very important thing for us. Startups are moving so fast. The pace of iteration is one of the most important aspects of a startup. And to be able to iterate fast, you need to be able to build your own product. That's why we are biased towards technical founders. In software, it's developers, but in other fields, like if you're in bio, like that could be different skills, but we want them to be able to build their own product. They need to be really determined. It's hard life. in a way, if I meet someone and I'm frightened to bet against them because there is so much determination in them, like, wow, it's good to be confident. Not overconfident. You need to be able to listen and like change, but that confidence is kind of like determination is kind of a very key attribute in founders. And then it really depends on who you are. If you are young and whatever, like maybe a year or two of college, or not even have been to college, I'm not going to look at your professional experience, of course. or even the college you went to, doesn't matter. And so it's all about like, what have you done in the past? Maybe as a teenager, you built some crazy project. That's a strong signal. If you are 40 years old, that's a very different way I'm looking at you. Like, what's your past experience? What have you learned? Where have you spent your professional experience in the past? Why have you not created a company earlier? I'm not going to wonder about the same questions depending of like who I have in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that can be completely automated as well? That you actually do the interviews with an AI agent?
I don't think that is going to happen anytime soon.
But why? Because it's also a bit of a gut feeling that you can't actually.
Yeah, of course. There is, and we do mistakes too. I mean, like everyone, like we're pretty good at picking winners, but hey, it's we invest so early that sometimes it doesn't work. Of course, we still have like 5 to 10% of our companies become unicorns. So, which is best in class in this world. But yeah, that gut feeling. It's more like gut feeling. I would be careful here. It's informed. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like sometimes I compare our mind to LLMs. You know, it's an LLM you have fine-tuned with so much data that when your guts tell you something,
no, sure, it's informed.
Something, you know.
But it's so complex that it's hard to just give a list.
Yeah, it's always good to try to articulate why. I think that's a great exercise. But if your guts tell you something, and it's true for any founder about their own business, when your guts, and that's something I've learned to, that I should have learned earlier, but I didn't have the same words to explain it before. But when you are a founder in your company and something happens and your guts tell you something is wrong here, maybe you hired a new VP who wants to do something and you think it's bad, it's not good, I would trust your gut. Mm-hmm. Then you try to explain, like to yourself, try to articulate the why, but I would not ignore your guts because your guts are like that fine-tuned LLM. Mm-hmm. Like when you have a fine-tuned LLM, you ask it a question, it's going to produce an answer. You actually trust it because you know it was fine-tuned a lot of relevant data. Mm-hmm. As founders, you are the best model ever about your own company. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And last question. So from my time at VC, right, I remember that one of the things that many people were surprised by is that there, in some sense, there is no secret sauce here, right? It's like talk to your user, get feedback, and then build a better product.
That's the only thing.
And don't do anything else.
That's the only two things you need to do to be successful.
But that seems to be incredibly hard to follow still, right? Maybe because it's so simple, it almost cannot be true.
And because it's hard, because you have to challenge yourself. Like it's safer, like to not do it. Mm-hmm. Like talking to users, it's actually a risk. They may tell you your product sucks, mm-hmm. so you don't want to talk with them. I'm going to improve the product first. It's easier to go to a meetup and speak with whatever random people and kind of like pitch your startup, because what's the risk here? You kind of feel good. All of these things don't matter. What you need to do is to talk to this user, try to find customers who actually pay you for the product. And if they don't, you want to understand why. Probably you have not figured it out yet. And then go back at building. And then you iterate. If you do these two things well for enough time, you're going to build a great company.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for taking your time, Nicolas, and sharing your insights. We don't hear from that front row seat so very often. So this is super insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was awesome.